Thank you very much. Thank you for coming to ARIJ 2016. This session is cross-border cooperation and collaboration, how and why. And this is to explore and celebrate the achievements of three extraordinary guys sitting here on the panel. You might wonder if you ever heard about the Panama Papers. And this story is going to be the collaboration of three gentlemen across the border. Their achievement is absolutely stunning. It's a groundbreaking in journalism. To delve into the story, I would like to welcome Gerard Ryle. He is the Director of International Consortium of Investigative Journalism. And on my right is Laurent Richard. He is the founder of Forbidden Stories. And Frank Obermeyer. He is the co-founder of Paper Trails. I'm going to set the scene by asking Gerard just to tell us exactly how this collaborative started.
Hi, everyone. Look, I'm really honored to be here, by the way. It all started for me about 16 years ago when I was working as a journalist in Australia. And I came across a very strange story about a guy who claimed to have invented a magic pill. And you put this pill in your motor vehicle and made your fuel last 20% longer, and it got rid of all the toxic emissions from your car. But it turned out that the magic pill never existed. And this whole story was concocted. It was really a Ponzi scheme. And this guy had raised about $100 million from investors who all thought they were going to be really wealthy when this company was made public. It turned out what he had done is he'd actually registered this company in the British Virgin Islands and created millions of shares in the company. And he was selling the shares illegally into Australia and around the world. And people, very famous people like Hollywood, people had bought into this, the Australian government had bought into it. I ended up writing a book about it. And after I wrote the book, somebody sent me a disc in the post, and it contained about 2.5 million records of the company that was setting up all these offshore accounts for this firm in the British Virgin Islands. And I remember at the time looking through it, I'd already written the book, and I saw all these names from around the world, and I thought, wouldn't it be fantastic if I could share this with reporters from Russia, from Canada? I saw all these stories in there. And then very shortly afterwards, by pure coincidence, I was offered the job of director of the International Consortium. So I thought, what a wonderful thing to do, to be able to go to Washington and then share this material. We ended up, this turned into a project in 2013 called Offshore Leaks. It was the very first project of this kind. And we worked with about 42 media companies around the world. And we learned a lot of lessons from doing it. Basically, we learned a lot of lessons by doing it badly.
People love stories, Frederick. Can you share some of the stories along the way that the three of you went through this enormous successful story?
Well, for me, there's good stories, there's embarrassing stories, and there's those that I'm a little bit proud of. I think one of the more embarrassing stories is when Gerard came to my colleagues and me with the said offshore leaks, and we had no clue at all what he and his colleagues spoke about data journalism, how to investigate a big leak of data. And we even, and now it's getting really embarrassing, we didn't even have the computing power, so we had to rent computers so that we could deal with the offshore leaks data. And I had to learn what a batch search is and stuff like that, what OCR means, and I learned from amazing people like Emilia and Gerard and their team at ICRJ. And then comes the more lucky parts of it, when my colleague Bastian Obermeyer and me received the data trove that is now known as the Panama Papers. And we also had to learn again. We had, for example, to learn how to use glitter nail polish. I'm an expert in glitter nail polish now because we put it on all the screws on our computers because we wanted to see if somebody tampers with our computers, because we saw all this data where there was Putin's best friend, a lot of oligarchs that we now know from all the sanctions lists, organized crime figures from Latin America. We saw a lot of royal families, or members of the royal families here in the Middle East being in the data, and we realized that there's a certain danger that our source could be exposed, or that somebody would want to stop us or the big team, because there's also like the, for me, encouraging story of the Panama Papers, that it proved that one could not only work together with dozens of journalists, as we have done, or ICIJ has done with the offshore leaks, but that we could do so with hundreds of journalists all around the world, and that we could keep a secret, that we could share radically. I must admit, during offshore leaks, it wasn't.
Let me stop you for just a second. You know, you were navigating a landmine, dealing with powers and dealing with secrets that is going to get out of hand. Lauren, how did you manage technology in order to keep everything and everybody in the loop, and that at the same time, nobody was aware that what you were investigating?
Yeah, and just before that, to precise, I was not part of the Panama Papers. I would have loved to, but what we are doing with Forbidden Stories is really inspired as well by the work of ICIJ or CCRP before. They are the pioneers in collaborative journalism. And what we are doing with Forbidden Stories, and before answering your question about how to keep that safe and what about the communication protocols, is about continuing the work of assassinated reporters, under threat reporters, or jail reporters. Because collaboration is bringing protection. It doesn't make sense to kill reporters if we are 50 to take over the same stories. Collaboration is bringing resources as well. We are splitting the work. We are 50, 100, and so we can not only investigate the crime committed in Mexico, but as well track the hidden assets of the drug cartels abroad. So this is why collaboration is extremely useful facing that kind of threats. And especially when you look at the profile of the journalist being killed.
The threat.
Yeah.
Is it a threat about a profession, about career, or personal threat?
It's first a threat for democracy, actually, because without information, you don't have any kind of democracy. So that's just what is at stake here. Without access to information, there is no way for people to know for who to vote or to change the politics. So when we are continuing the work of an Indian reporter like Gauri Lankesh, who was killed in 2017, she was killed because she was investigating the disinformation industry. And that's not only an issue in India, that's an issue everywhere. So that's why we continue the work of Gauri in India, but as well in Israel, in many places, in South America, in Africa, to investigate the mercenaries of the disinformation. So to answer your question about technology, and there is clearly a need first to communicate safely when we are running that kind of collaboration. And that's very challenging, because in front of us, we have companies like the NSO Group selling Pegasus, that is a spyware sold to many state actors who are spying all over the world in many countries to all the journalists, to dissidents, and so on. So we have to be creative. In that sense, we have to work with people who have the knowledge, like Amnesty International, Security Lab, or Citizen Lab, to run some forensic analysis. And so when we were doing the Pegasus project, every 2 or 3 days at Forbidden Stories, within the team, we were running some forensic on our device. We were asking to do the same with our partners here, because it was crucial. It was crucial not only to protect the investigation, not only to protect our life and our privacy, but also, first of all, to protect our sources.
Okay. Given about the protection of sources, and you had to deal with some real powers like perhaps even Putin, and one of the problems you also faced, the limited budget. Can you combine these two concepts and touch upon them?
Well, we found, basically from doing it wrong, we found that we needed to share all of the information all of the time with the journalists. The very first time we tried to do this, we had this crazy idea that we would create hubs around the world. The journalists would fly in, look at information, and then leave with their stories intact, and then write their stories or broadcast their stories later. We realized that the way to go forward was to put everything into the cloud, and so that the reporters could look at the information all of the time. I think in the early days of ICIJ, when we were doing this, we had no money, we had no budget. We needed to do everything on a shoestring. We had some very clever people working for us. So we went and we used open source software. We basically got software that had been designed as a dating website, and we turned that into what is now the first, or was the first, iHub, which is the online newsroom that we use to communicate. But of course, it wasn't particularly secure. And then to be able to share the data, we adapted software that had been designed for librarians. And the librarians were supposed to share book titles,
Did you ever notice somebody was hacking into this file?
Well, I think nothing is secure. You have to know that we did have a few instances of people trying to get into it. And of course, the more reporters that you involve, the bigger the risk you're taking, because every reporter is a potential vulnerable point for you. I do think, to be really honest, I think we got away with it because no one had ever tried to do this before. And therefore, all of the authorities, all of the people that we ended up exposing didn't see this threat coming. And so by the time we had finished Panama Papers, which was obviously a huge phenomenon, we needed to completely upgrade everything, have security. We now use two-factor authentication. We have full-time people looking after our security. We monitor all threats. But in the early days, to be really honest, anyone could have walked through the front door, but no one knew the front door was there.
Frederick, is Gerard explaining right now the safe box network, or is this something completely different?
No, what Gerard is explaining is basically the architecture, the infrastructure for all investigative projects run by ICIJ, but they are also inspired by something, and they do inspire other networks like Forbidden Stories, also like working with something similar to iHub. The OCCRP is also working with a wiki, and they all have a search structure. And I think that's what we all need when it comes to investigation. We need basically two pillars. The one is a space where we can communicate, where we can discuss findings, pros and cons. Do we miss something out here? And we need a space where we can search and make information and documents, huge amounts of documents, available to a bigger crowd in a very safe way.
Is this model copyable here in this part of the world, in the Middle East? The model that you used in order to communicate and keep everything intact and secure?
Well, in all those projects, especially at ICIJ, we normally had partners from the region, and they were amazing partners. But we also see and have learned through the Pegasus project of Forbidden Stories that journalists here in the regions are targeted by far more by spyware like Pegasus than, for example, journalists are in my home country. So it raised the projects like Pegasus project raised the awareness and also help us in projects of ICIJ to be more aware, to also help each other. So I still remember that during the Panama Papers days, we went to an electronics shop in Munich when we had some journalists from Russia being there, because we all came to the conclusion that it would be good if they had a phone that was not bought in Russia, that has no paper trail with a credit card. So we went to a shop there with a bundle of cash, what is even not, especially in electronics shops, you normally buy with a card. But well, we bought it, the phone there to enable, to have a second way of communication that was not attached to a Russian SIM card, to a Russian shop, to enable communication with them in a very safe way.
Lauren, what is your criteria for publishing? When do you decide that the story is complete and you have verified everything and it's time to go?
Well, the first thing we do when we learn about the killing of a journalist, or when colleagues of the slain journalist are reaching out to us, is to first to investigate if there is a relation between the journalism of the person and the killing of the person. Then the other thing is we try to do what we can, how we can work together, how we can work with other colleagues of the journalist. It depends on the situation. There are some countries we cannot enter inside, other countries that we can definitely build some coalition with local news organization, with a foreign news organization. So it really depends. And then the thing, we try to start from a local story to make the story as global as we can, to make sure that what is happening in Guatemala, to make sure that it was happening in India is not only an Indian case, an Indian crime. That's a crime committed against press freedom, that's a crime committed against access of information, and it's talking to all of us. And just going back to the SafeBox network, the SafeBox network is something that we are doing with Forbidden Stories, the idea is to offer to at-risk journalists all over the world, for the one who are really the most threatened journalists, a place where they can secure their ongoing investigation. You are a Mexican journalist and you did an interview yesterday with the corrupted politicians and you're afraid to be prevented to publish that. You're afraid to be killed, to be arrested, or to be kidnapped. And then you can reach out to us and send us your interview and your notes about the investigation and the instruction about what we should do in case you got killed or you got kidnapped. And more, we have more than 100 journalists around the world who are really highly threatened, who are using the Safe Box network every week. And I really believe that's a kind of collective response using technology. We rely on Secure Drop, which is a whistleblower submission platform that is extremely solid, to receive the information from the most at-risk journalists. That's important to do that. Why? Because when you look at the profile of the journalists who have been killed, most of them are sharing something in common. They were very isolated. They were not having any more newsroom behind them because it was too dangerous to be a newsroom in that place. And so with the Safe Box network, we are reconnecting the journalists who are very isolated with us, with all of us, with the community here, so they can share about their ongoing investigation. And if something happens, we will continue the work. This is what we did recently after the killing of Rafael Moreno in Colombia. Rafael was targeted by different mafia clans, drug cartels, politicians. He reached out to us one day and told us about the threat he was receiving, told us about the leads he was investigating, and asked us to continue his work in case he was killed. He was killed 3 days after that. And so right after, we set up a coalition with the help of a lot of Colombian news organizations to do the Rafael project and to continue the work of Rafael. And just to finish, sorry to be long, this is not only about making sure the people will access to the information, but that's also about sending really a strong signal to the killers, to tell them how much it's counterproductive to kill a journalist, to tell them that you kill the messenger, but you will never kill the message. And the very same stories you wanted to say them at the beginning.
The message is coming loud and clear. You know, this is a very dangerous profession. I would like to open it for question period, but before that, Gerard, you have become a global icon. Your names are recognizable everywhere, and you are invited here. But that was not all the throughout. You faced enormous problems. Can you touch upon some of the perhaps mistakes you committed or the failures you encountered?
I think at the beginning, it was really, really difficult to convince media companies that they needed to share. But I think we were very lucky in that when we started getting these big data sets, it was at a time when they were under a lot of commercial pressure and they had to start rethinking the way they were doing things. So, but it was very difficult at the beginning. We basically got a lot of pushback. We also made lots of mistakes, and we were very lucky in that we made all the mistakes when no one really knew what we were doing.
What were these mistakes?
Well, I think, we had to learn how to communicate. We had to learn to interest journalists in the story. I mean, it's all about journalism. You cannot go to a media company with a half-baked story or a half-baked idea. You've actually got to go with something of unique interest to each country. So each journalist has got to have an incentive to want to work with you. In the old days when collaborations were happening, and I'm talking 20 years ago, reporters were expected to get paid. ICIJ came along and changed that dynamic. We don't pay anybody. We basically give people the story, and in return for giving them the story, they want to work. You would give them the incentive of the story as the reward. You didn't give them money, but
what did you do for funding for yourself?
Again, we had very, very, very little money. We went to foundations. And of course, as we got better known, it became easier. We're a bit like ARIJ. I mean, talk to anyone who's running ARIJ and you'll know how difficult it is to actually raise money from foundations. But as you can show that your work is making a difference to the world, it gets easier.
Frederick, do you have a story to share?
About the mistakes, so many, but I think we have to do that on over lunch because it will the whole panel would explode about all the mistakes I made. So,
okay, how did you three get together? I mean, how did you know each other?
Well,
you're German, he's French, and he's Australian. How did you guys connect together? Because the reason why I'm asking is, for instance, somebody here in Jordan, someone in Egypt or in Algeria, if they wanted to work on a project, how do they approach each other? Is it just through names or there is a specific criteria for choosing the right partner?
I think for choosing the right partner, I have to excuse my French a little bit because there's one good rule, and that's the no asshole rule. That you listen around, like who is a nice journalist to collaborate with. And sometimes it's not the biggest names, not the big shots. Sometimes it's very young colleagues who are like enthusiastic and who know how to play by the rules. Because unfortunately, we still in investigative journalism have some of the lonely wolves, like those journalists who do not want to collaborate, who always want to keep their own scoop. They sometimes pretend to collaborate, but always want something better than the others. And I think that's the wrong approach. What we really need is the radical sharing approach, that if you commit to be partner in a project, it means you have to share everything, not hide anything, keep something back. And I think you find those partners if you listen around, if you ask others who is good. So because, for example, colleagues that I have worked with in the ICIJ environment are sometimes the same colleagues who pop up in collaborations with Forbidden Stories. And I think it's a simple reason, because it's journalists who have proven to be good collaborative partners. And if you mess with your colleagues in an international collaboration, you can bet that this will make its round, that in every part of the globe, others will learn that you have messed with the others. So I think the best rule for everyone is like, be nice to the others, be the one journalist who everybody wants to collaborate with. Be happy if they ask you for advice, if they ask you for help. So sometimes it's not only about the big projects. Sometimes it's about this little favors one can do. If a colleague from Jordan calls me via ARIJ and tells me like, hey, I need something from the German company registry, I can easily do it, but I know that for him or her, it might be difficult. The same for me. For me, it's super difficult to search in Arabic documents, even like to read or find an Arabic newspaper article from, let's say, the 90s is super difficult. But I know whom to ask, and that's ARIJ in this region.
Let us put this in historical perspective. We are talking about 2016. Since then, ChatGPT, AI, has become, the tool everybody is using. To what extent, had you had the AI at the time, your job would have been a lot easier, Lauren?
Honestly, I don't know. It's difficult to see how much the job would have been different. And I think as well, to answer your other question, what is connecting all of us here on stage? I think we all believe, the three of us and many partners that we do work with here. And yesterday we were running a workshop with the SafeBox Network with many journalists coming from Egypt, Yemen. We believe in collective intelligence. We believe that we don't believe anymore, I think, in a lone wolf reporter model that were existing before. We believe that journalism can change as well societies. And sometimes I'm teaching journalism, and there is one thing that I'm really observing that is really new, is that 25 years ago when I wanted to become a journalist, I wanted to become a journalist because I wanted to make some scoop, to break some stories, and to be on the front page. But now in the School of Journalism, what we see is people who want, young generation who want to produce some change in the society regarding climate change, regarding the lack of accountability. And the collaborative model here is, I think, the key or the perfect vehicle to produce that kind of effect. Because if you only think about your impact in your territory, it's in vain. So I think this is what
in that case, let me address something that's quite obvious. In one way or another, you are all Western, okay? Do you see the model in the future where somebody from Australia and an African and a Russian and an Arab can collaborate on a project? Or this is like a mindset because you know the rules, you know the laws, and that's why it was a lot easier for you?
No, this is already the case, actually. You have some clip in South America. You have other organization, collaborative organization, cross-border organization in Africa. There are many projects in Asia as well. There is no border for crimes. So there is no border for collaboration for such an organization like that. At Forbidden Stories, we do collaborate with in many parts of the world, and most of the killing are happening in the south as well. So one of the challenge when you are running a cross-border organization like that is to keep the process as democratic as you can as well, to make sure that the team coming from the big newspapers in the US will have the same equal voice than the small non-profit in Asia. And so, and we have to be very careful with that. In a way, we have to be, we have to build that kind of new rules as well, because it's quite new as well. So to make sure that the way we are doing journalism is reflecting as well a democratic process as much as we can.
Gerard, now with the benefit of hindsight, what are the lessons you learned from this experience? Something you can share with young journalists just embarking on a career?
I think the most important lesson we've learned over the years is that you have to respect every journalist you work with, and you have to listen to what they're saying. You often impose your idea of what a story is on other journalists, and that's actually a terrible mistake. And it's, you know, what you think is a story isn't necessarily a story in the country that this journalist is working in. And so you need to learn to respect, and you also need to learn, I mean, everything is built on trust. Like Frederick was saying, it's not about finding the great superstars in each country. It's about finding people that you inherently trust will be there from the beginning of the project to the end, and who will share information freely with you and with everybody else all the way through, and not holding it.
The trust is a very elastic and mysterious something. You cannot really risk everything on it. You have to be certain.
And again, when you're building these big collaborations, it's important that if somebody breaches that trust, that you don't go back to them, that you have to have almost like a system where you're punishing people who are not playing by the rules, so that everyone else does play by the rules. But you've also got to do things that are actually interesting to the public. It's got to be a service mentality. We're there to do public service work. We're not there to line our shelves with trophies and other things. It's all about the journalism. You've got to keep bringing it back to that. We're there to do stories. We're there to serve the public.
Laurent, do you see this as one-off, or this is something you can build on other fields?
Yeah, no, I think I really believe that's the global trend. But there is, I think, as well, many changes in front of us regarding collaboration, this collaborative model. One thing is the audience of what we are doing, who we are talking to. The newspapers, or the audience of the newspapers, are really decreasing in many parts of the world. And I think that what we are looking for through that kind of collaboration, when we are revealing the misuse of the spyware, the money laundering, or the hidden assets of some autocrats, we want to make sure that we have complex story that will be told in a simple way and to reach a large audience. That's the dream, of course. And now the audience are on Instagram, on TikTok account, through some influencers as well. So I think one of the big challenge on our side will be to adjust as well.
For just a second, because I have only 30 seconds left, and let me finish with Frederick. Did you expect the backlash as it did?
Well, I didn't expect it to that extent that we have seen. I mean, it was really sad and shocking to see journalists who covered the Panama Papers after they have been published being killed, like Daphne Caruana Galizia. That was something that I must admit I have not expected, especially not in Europe. I was completely naive in that regard. And that's why I'm super glad that networks like Forbidden Stories are like setting an example.
Thank you, Frederick.
And thereby protecting all of us and democracy.
Frederick Obermeyer, Laurent Richard, Gerard Ryle, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
On time.
Yeah.